I was in several foster care situations, I think 3 or 4. It always seemed short and seemed as if we were getting bounced around.
That's Dominic Snuffer. He was 5 when he and his 4 younger siblings went into the first of their foster care homes.
The hard parts was probably just the beginning on how much I just always try to keep my siblings in check. I felt as if they behaved in a way, just like the other situations, we might get taken away.
Reunification with a child's biological family or a relative is often the goal. However, about 1/3 of children in foster care are ultimately adopted by their foster parents.
Feels like yesterday that I got adopted. It went by fast. The things that make me smile was definitely adoption day, because I knew I finally found a family, and another I could try and live out the rest of my childhood.
From West Virginia Public Broadcasting and PRX, this is Us and Them, the show that tells the stories about the things that divide us and bring us back together. I'm Trey Kay. Nationwide, there are more than 390,000 children in foster care. But last year, more than half of all states saw a big drop in the number of licensed foster care homes. While there may be many reasons for that, a primary factor is that new foster parents don't stay in the system for long. Meanwhile, more vulnerable children need support and care. So today, we hear from several people who share their experiences about what it's like to navigate this complex system.
Literally every state has their challenges with just having enough viable foster homes to house the kids that are coming into care. There's not a state that's figured this out to have enough capacity to serve the kids coming into care and staying in care. I'm Larry Cooper. I am the Executive Vice President of Innovation at the Children's Home Network.
The Children's Home Network is based out of Tampa Bay, Florida.
Our agency works with kids in the foster care system and also has a whole set of services to prevent and support families from ever entering into the foster care system.
Cooper has been working with foster kids and families at the Children's Home Network for more than 20 years, and he's spent 8 years licensing foster homes. That means he helps recruit and train foster parents to bring new foster homes online in Florida. Cooper says some of the challenge bringing in new foster parents comes from an approval process that's strict for a reason, but can take more than 12 months. A lot of people drop out along the way.
You might fall off because of just life experiences that you may be going through. You might have a change in jobs. You might have an illness in your family. You might have a death in the family. And so I used to see for every 100 parents that I recruited, I only would get maybe a 4 to 6% return on investment, meaning that I might get only 4 to 6 families actually get a kid into their home for every 100 that would call me and be interested in becoming a foster parent.
Poverty and economic hardship drive a majority of children into foster care.
It's probably about 60% of those kids primarily are coming in because of some residue of their struggles in poverty, right? The parents are struggling to provide food, housing, adequate support. And so they're struggling. And so many families, rather than getting preventive services in place to support them, are often removed and placed into foster care and then maybe sentenced basically to 12 or 18 months in a foster care system for their parents to then have to chase down, meeting a number of goals and requirements and get themselves stable in order to get their kids back home.
As of March 2024, there are just over 6,000 children in West Virginia's foster care system. The West Virginia Center on Budget and Policy reports that the state places 4 times as many children per capita into the foster care system as the United States as a whole. Most of the cases are related to parental substance use or child neglect. Cooper says getting people to seek treatment, especially in rural areas, can be a challenge.
Certainly, families that live in more rural communities have even less access to substance abuse treatment and prevention services. And then you just have that general lack of trust that families have for these formal systems. So there's already a general distrust for systems of large statewide systems of care. And so families avoid services in a lot of cases because they just don't trust that services are going to be in their best interest and actually help their family.
The largest number of children in foster care are between 5 and 13 years old, in their elementary and middle school years. That's how old Dominic Snuffer was when he was first placed in foster care. We heard him at the top of the show. He's now 20 and a college student. We'll hear more of his family's story a little later. Before a child enters the foster care system, several things need to happen. First, someone reports a legitimate concern about the health and wellness of a child. It can be a wide range, injury, or a young child who's left home alone. That's when Child Protective Services can step in. CPS investigates and determines whether there's an immediate danger to a child. If so, another sequence of events determines the best safe place for the child. Sometimes it's with family.
The birth parents get a say in where their kids are placed.
That's Brandy Wilson. She worked for CPS in West Virginia for 20 years.
But then you have to do the background. So even a CPS thinks that there's the grandma that's been great, always involved, but she has a history, a criminal background, then it goes to the MDT, multidisciplinary team, to determine where this child goes. Because the child will have their own attorney. That is their voice. So they get to make a decision in that as well.
Brandy Wilson and her husband Mark Wilson live just across the river from West Virginia in St. Clairsville, Ohio. One day, back in 2014, Brandy's work at the Department of Health and Human Resources and her personal life collided.
At the time, I was working in West Virginia, Ohio County as a Child Protective Service worker. And just doing a regular day, there was a child removed, waited for the foster parents to come. Foster parents came, took the child was placed. We went on to the next case. The next day, while I was at work, I seen my husband's uncle come in to my place of work. And he stopped me and was telling me that the child that was removed yesterday was his granddaughter and was telling me all this information. I was not able to tell my husband that one of his family members had been removed because of confidentiality.
So you're not allowed to make that type of disclosure?
No, I was not allowed to let him know. But his uncle wanted his number to give him a call. So once the uncle disclosed to him that a child was removed, that situation, then we were able to say if we wanted to place my other child because we were family.
The child we're talking about, who was taken from her West Virginia home, was an 8-month-old baby. To protect her privacy, we'll call her Elle. So, Mark, can you tell me a little bit about your relative? And you realize that Brandy, your wife, can't tell to you about this. What was that like?
Yeah, it's a little different knowing that she could have this information, not legally, not be able to share it with me. So just by happenstance, like I said, he happened to be walking in that day while she was at work, and then that set everything in motion where he asked for my number, and then I was aware of it, and then we talked about it, and then sat down with the kids and made sure it was going to be okay with them.
Brandy and Mark already had 3 daughters at home between 11 and 17 years old. How long did you have to think about it? Was it something like the way you just shook your head like you didn't think about it long?
When I talked to my uncle, I didn't necessarily think we're going to take this child in. But when the idea came up, it wasn't even a second thought for me to help a child out in need.
Why didn't you think about it twice?
Honestly, I can't even tell you. It's just the way we are his parents, I guess.
Heck, we already had 3. What's one more, girl?
It wasn't a question for
He might have hesitated if it was a boy, not knowing what to do with a boy,
yeah,
but
what would I ever do?
Even though Mark was related to the baby girl, the process to qualify as foster parents was rigorous. Because they lived just outside of the state border in Ohio, the Wilsons had to satisfy a set of regulations in both states.
we had to work with West Virginia, do what West Virginia told us to do, but then we had to work with Ohio and what their regulations were for our house. So we had to abide by their rules too. Once we got approved, she was 11 months old when she was finally able to be placed, but we had done visits, overnights, things like that with her.
The way you're looking right now, it sounds like it's
miserable.
It's a miserable.
It is miserable, yes. And I feel bad for families that aren't in the field. My husband's not in the social work field. So a lot of the times when they were talking, I knew what the next steps were. I knew what was happening. But he would be like, so what happens now? For people that aren't in the field and know the terminology and know what the next steps are, it is very confusing, very overwhelming.
Brandy says her professional background helped her navigate the experience. She knew who to reach out to and what paperwork needed to be filed. But it was all new to her husband, Mark. Once the Wilsons were approved as Elle's foster parents, the hearings and court appearances continued regarding the child's custody.
It's unlike anything I'd ever experienced before. What they were talking about, the steps that they have to go through.
Can you tell me some of the steps?
So the first hearing is the preliminary hearing. At that preliminary hearing, if those kids aren't returned, chances are this case is going to go on for 6 months to a year. It doesn't end because they were clean for 30 days.
Let's say, I don't know what happened in this situation, but if they got in recovery and they were kind of making steps to make sure that they were more responsible parents, then it could be that even though you were probably acting in a foster parent situation, that it could be that the child were returned to the parents, right?
Yes, they could have been reunified. So they go through the preliminary hearing, and then they go through the adjudication. Any parent that's had a child removed from them has to stipulate to the allegations. And that's what's hard to explain to some people. It's different. You have to admit that you have a deficit. Yes, I struggle with domestic violence. Yes, I struggle with drugs. Yes, I struggle with being homeless. So they have to admit where their deficit is so that they can work towards fixing it to ensure a safe environment for the child. And so they go through an improvement period. You get a 6-month improvement period to go to rehab, to go to counseling, to go to whatever.
Brandy says, according to court documents, Elle's parents were doing well and showing signs that they did want to get her back.
And then it got to the disposition. Are they going to relinquish their parental rights, or are they going to be terminated?
Or reunified, right?
Yeah, the disposition could have been reunified.
So how did this process go? There's 3 choices: relinquish, there could be improvement, or that the state could terminate. So what happened here?
They wanted a hearing. They felt that they had done enough. They were doing well. They were fighting to have her placed back in the home. And then by the end of the court hearing, they took a break and come back out and relinquished.
So the state showed up and said, well, you say that you would like to bring this child back in, but we have this example and this example and this example, which that does not instill confidence in us that you're really doing what you need to do. And we don't think you have not really improved this situation.
Yes, that's exactly. But they felt that they had done enough to be able to get her back, so they wanted to fight it. And they fought for a while until the state started bringing in witnesses, and they asked their attorneys for a break. And then they come back out and they relinquished.
What was that moment like?
When they came back from the recess and they both took the stand and said that they give up the rights to their child, I just started breaking down. And she was sitting beside me like this, and she looked over at me. She said, "What's wrong?" I said, "I could never imagine saying that about my own child." She was kind of numb to it because she's worked in the field. It was hard to hear somebody say that.
It wasn't until he was sitting next to me in the courtroom that I realized not everybody hears relinquishment. Not everybody hears abuse, neglect. Not everybody hears that as CPS workers do and are just everyday language. So once I was with him and realized, okay, this isn't everybody's life. They may have drug issues, domestic violence, gangs coming in and out of their home, but these words are not everyday life for a lot of people.
That wasn't the end of the process for the Wilsons. After Elle's parents relinquished their legal rights, the baby's maternal grandmother tried to get custody, even though Elle's mother didn't want it to happen. It took over 2 years of court hearings and psychological evaluations before Brandy and Mark were able to legally adopt Elle.
You say the whole thing took 3 years. Is that a normal timeline for this type of kinship adoption?
No, it's not typical. Most kinship placements are either with grandparents or with an aunt, somebody that's close with the family. So there's usually not other parties intervening and wanting that chance of placement. So usually from start to finish, it could take a year to a year and a half to get it all. And again, that depends on the parents' improvement period, how they're doing. If they fall off and nobody sees from them again in 3 months, that makes the adoption process quicker. It resolves quicker.
Today, Elle is a happy 10-year-old. She has no contact with her parents or grandparents. The experience took a toll on Brandy, who says it prompted her to leave the profession.
When you work in CPS, you don't ever stop working. It doesn't matter if you're punched out, if you're done for the day, you just don't ever stop. Your phone is constantly dinging. You're wondering where these families are, what's going to happen next, what fire am I going to have to put out in the morning. So I knew I had to leave. I had to get out so that I could have a steady job, be home with her, be part of her life instead of peeking in on her, see if she's asleep and heading back out for another case.
After Brandy left CPS, she worked briefly at the juvenile courthouse before landing a job as a kinship navigator with Mission West Virginia.
I'm able to take the time with these kinship placements and talk them through the process. Let them get familiar with what all these acronyms are and what steps are going to be taken. And a lot of them just want somebody to talk to.
The Kinship Navigator program at Mission West Virginia is a nonprofit that's been around since 1997. Rachel Kinder supervises the program.
I would say that one of the really valuable pieces of our Kinship Navigator program is that we are there for people in the very transitional period. So once you have signed up for certain benefits, in West Virginia, we have TANF child only, which basically means you're not qualifying financially, you're qualifying because you have a child placed in your home. But it takes a few weeks for that to get all set up.
Kinder has been working with the foster care system for more than 2 decades and has seen lots of trends. In 2019, there was a record high of 7,200 children in West Virginia's foster care system. Kinder says while it can be hard to pinpoint a single reason for the decline over the past few years, there are some programs that could have contributed.
In the last few years, there has been some emphasis on preventative services and not taking kids into care immediately. I don't know that anyone could say exactly what has led to a recent decrease, but the 7,000 was concerning.
One of Florida's programs with the Children's Home Network is called Healthy Families. Larry Cooper says it supports new parents during the stressful first years and is one of their most successful programs.
These families enter into this program before the child turns 3 months of age and can work with that parent all the way up to the child's 5th birthday and provides help with bonding with the child, engaging with the child development, and 99% of the time prevents child abuse and neglect for those families that are being served by the program. And even 12 months after they've completed the program, when we look back, we see that those kids are safe and stable even 12 months after the service is completed.
Rachel Kender of Mission, West Virginia, says there's another factor to keep in mind about the number of children in foster care. While it's one thing to count the legal cases overseen by the Department of Human Services, or DOHS, she says there are many informal kinds of kinship care that are not official or included in state data.
I can tell you the number of kids in formal care. So if there are 6,078 kids in foster care in West Virginia, right now 58% of those are in kinship relative placements. For kids in informal care, where grandma or an aunt or some type of relative or even what we call fictive kin has stepped in, it's almost impossible to get numbers on that.
Fictive care refers to placements where a foster parent knows the child but is not related to them. This could be a teacher, a family friend, or a neighbor.
The census tracks grandparent-headed households, but the census doesn't track kids who are living informally with relatives. It's a very fluid population. You know, a child might be living with grandma for a month or two, and then they move to another relative or they go back home. So it's not a number that we ever have good luck getting, but it would be significantly higher than the number of kids in actual foster care.
In 2014, Rachel and her husband began to experience all of this firsthand when they became foster parents. The pathway through the foster system involves a number of agencies.
So DOHS certifies kinship and relative, and 10 different private agencies certify for general foster care, what they sometimes call resource homes. It's difficult to know, hey, I'm in county ABC, which of those 10 agencies are serving my county? How do I contact them? What's the particular worker in that county? So Mission West Virginia acts as information and referral. We try to be step one in that process. And the basic process, which right now we tell people takes about 4 to 6 months, is choosing an agency, filling out an application, going through training, and going through a home study process. And that home study is generally someone coming to your home, background checks, paperwork, reference checks, just a pretty thorough process. And about 4 to 6 months is what we tell people is the average to be certified. And during that process, you would determine, you know, these are ages, genders, behaviors, all of that I feel capable of parenting.
So that's one route, and that's for somebody who wants to become a foster parent.
Right. So if you are a relative or a kinship care provider, you have no notice, generally. You might get a call in the middle of the night. You might get a call. You might know it's coming because you may be aware that your relative is under investigation, or you may not. And DOHS, when they take custody of children, they need to look for any appropriate in-state relatives because they can't send kids out of state without pre-authorizations, but they're looking for appropriate in-state relatives. And it's a good and a bad thing that DOHS can place these kids with the relative, even though that relative is not certified as a foster care provider at that time. So then the relative has kids who are probably traumatized by whatever led to their removal. They may not have their belongings, they may not have their clothing, and then it's the relative's job to apply for all related benefits and assistance to help them parent these kids, taking them to doctor's appointments, therapy, just a lot of things that you weren't prepared for.
At the same time, there is increased need. Kender says there simply aren't enough foster parents. It can be hard for CPS and foster agencies to match the needs of children with homes available.
I might be certified to do foster care, but I might only have placement for a girl under the age of 4, whereas another foster home might have 3 placements for teenagers. Foster parents have different capabilities. So when my husband and I were certified, we were certified for basically 5 and under. And it wasn't as much, hey, I only want to parent young kids, but there was no after-school care in our county. So if I got a placement, I could get them enrolled in school, but I wouldn't have care for them in the afternoons. So I said, I can do daycare age kids because we both work full time. So every family has very specific circumstances. And you get certified based on, who you feel capable of parenting. That doesn't mean that they're not going to call you with every possible scenario. There are families certified for 2 and under who would get a call on teenagers because they need a placement for a teenager. What I always tell people when they're new to the system is, whatever you're told when that child is placed, expect it to do a 180 throughout the case. It's a giant roller coaster. It's emotional. And there's just, we don't have magic calculators to kind of predict where that case is going to go.
Does West Virginia face a different range of challenges in keeping the nuclear family together as opposed to other states or other regions of the country?
When we look for data or when we look for programming that is like ours, we look to other kind of rural Appalachian states, and we pretty easily match what's going on there. I know that compared to other states, we do better at keeping kids with kinship and relative care. But I would say barriers are just poverty, and there's always so much lack of services that the kids and families need.
So when you are working with a family that has a generation missing, in some cases it could be the parents, but it could also be the grandparents.
Right.
What are the most important things to consider?
I think the really hard part for these families is that, one, say the kids are placed with grandparents. The grandparents have lost their ability to be grandparents. You can't spoil the kids. You're not someone there for a special occasion. You have to be the parents. You have to be tough on them. And you really, very sadly, lose that role as grandparent. And then also that changes the relationship that they have with their son or daughter, because their relationship is dictated by DOHS to say your son or daughter cannot come to your home anymore, they can't see the kids, or they can't see the kids without supervision. And in some really tough cases, they're essentially having to choose their grandkids over their own kids. When we're working with that kind of situation, one of the categories that we kind of try to capture, which is really hard to capture in data, is just being an emotional support to the families. And I have different categories like listening ear versus validation, and it gets kind of silly. But really, just someone on that other end of the phone that they can vent to, that they can kind of share their concerns with, that they can feel someone is listening to them. Because with worker caseloads the way that they are, there's not a CPS worker that has an hour to spend on the phone with these relatives, and we do in some ways. And just making them feel heard has been significant.
When we come back from a break, we'll visit with the Snuffers, a West Virginia family that has taken in dozens of children.
A lot of those kids were when our older kids were younger than they are now, because our oldest son's 23. When he was in high school, he had a terrible habit of taking after us and bringing kids home that needed help.
And we'll hear from Larry Cooper about how to provide more support for a system with growing needs.
I think part of the challenge is how do we introduce legislators to those families that are doing amazing for kids and breaking that stigma, those myths of, well, these are just people who are just sucking off of the system.
I'm Trey Kay, and you're listening to Us and Them. Our show is supported in part by the West Virginia Humanities Council and the CRC Foundation.
In difficult times, music gives us peace, brings us together, and helps heal us. It calms our nerves and brightens our days. That's why we're bringing you classic episodes of Mountain Stage on air and in our podcast. This is Larry Gross, host of Mountain Stage. Find something that's familiar or brand new and feel the power of live music on our website, mountainstage.org.
I'm Trey Kay, and this is Us and Them from PRX and West Virginia Public Broadcasting. There's a clear need for foster families across the nation and in West Virginia. Nikki Snuffer and her wife Louisa knew they would consider becoming foster parents when it came time for them to start a family. There's a lot going on in their Sissonville home. The couple currently has 12 children, ranging from ages 10 months to 20 years old. Plus, they breed French bulldogs. In addition to all that activity, it's clear there's a lot of love in this home. The Snuffers got involved with foster care because of Louisa's childhood. Before she was born, her parents had 3 boys, one of whom died in an accident as a toddler. The 2 remaining boys each went into different foster homes. Then Louisa was born, along with another brother. Again, the children were each placed in different foster homes. Louisa has never met her older 2 brothers. Louisa's wife, Nikki, says that experience has helped define their goal.
She expressed that she really wanted to do foster care and kind of focus on families. She could help keep sibling groups together.
I'm just curious, like, what was the conversation like? And you're thinking of a future together. I mean, was that a tough decision saying, hey, I'd like to bring in foster children and not just one, but maybe several?
It actually was a pretty easy decision because we were both on the same page almost always with helping people. That's just, she's a very caring, giving person. I'm a very caring, giving person.
Louisa says that plan, well, sometimes even the best plan needs to be flexible.
And I've known since probably my early high school years that I did want to do foster care. However, we really wanted no more than maybe 3. And the way life and things happen, we got 5 at one time. Because I come from a family, I have 2 brothers who were put in foster care that I never knew, and I still don't know. So we made a commitment that when we got into it, that we would never split up families.
If they call us for a sibling group, we're not going to say no to them because that was her number one belief. Like, we need to do whatever we can to keep siblings together. And that's what we did. When we were initially approved, we were approved for 4 children. So DHHR told us we could have 4 children in the house, given the space, and that was kind of our cap. I said, maybe we'll do 3 tops. That seems like a manageable number. And the very first call we got for placement was a sibling group of 5. Of course, we said yes. We had to do a few things to get approved for a 5th child. They moved in with us. Things went great. After a year with us, we adopted them, and then their mother had another baby. And so when she was taken into foster care, because we were the biggest advocate for, hey, when and if she comes into foster care, she's ours. And that's what happened.
That was your first situation, 5. And how's your family grown since then?
After the initial first 6 kids, the 6 siblings, we started mentoring a teenager in a group home because we weren't done helping, you know what I mean? And we started mentoring him, and he got in some trouble at the group home, ended up getting kicked out of the group home. So we were like, of course, send him to us. We love this kid. He's great. And we ended up adopting him. And after he was adopted, we got a call that his mother had another baby and abandoned her at the hospital. And so we ended up with her, and that's our youngest daughter. And she went through severe withdrawal, 6 weeks in the hospital to withdraw from substances.
There's an interruption at this point from a fussy baby who needs a diaper change. Nikki pretends to throw the diaper at their son, Dominic. That's right, Dominic. He's the 20-year-old college student who we met at the top of the show.
Dominic, think fast.
Tossed it in there.
It's an old hat for us.
Many of the children the Snuffers have cared for, they know through Nikki's job at Winfield High School. She's an instructor for the Future Leaders Program, or FLP. It's the National Guard's high school curriculum that's taught by veterans. In the program, students learn leadership and life skills, science, career prep, and other subjects.
My kids that have gone to Winfield, I make them go through it, not because I'm teaching it, but because even if it wasn't me, I'd want them to get these skills. It's kind of things that are forgotten these days.
Is it people through Mission, West Virginia? Is it people through CPS? Is it people through your high school who may note that here's some kids who may be in some type of familial distress? There may be something that's going on at home, and they know to call you. I mean, it seems to me like, in many ways, like there's a bat phone, or they send a bat signal up, and then
we'll call Nikki because these kids don't have a place. It seems like that, but I promise it's not. These are kids that have all been in the FLP program that I've known, like For example, he was going into his senior year and he was telling me, I don't know if I'm going to be able to go to school at Winfield. I don't know what's going to happen. My situation's kind of changing at home. I need some help. And I was like, well, you're going to graduate. And then if you want to graduate from Winfield, you can come stay with me because you're 18. You can make that decision for yourself. And so we moved him down. He got through high school. He's doing great. And, he still calls me at least once a week to check in. We helped most of them the best we could. We were always in contact with the parents, to make sure we had their medical cards, whatever insurance. We just wanted them to graduate high school, a lot of them, because they were at risk for not graduating. One boy, we would drive to school every day to make sure he wasn't leaving the school because he just had a terrible habit of skipping. And we got added to all of his stuff, so his teachers would call and check in with us instead of his father. And I mean, we really tried with him. He didn't graduate, but he was one, like we put a lot of time and effort into him. We helped another girl who was a teenager. She stayed with us long enough to get on in the classes regularly because she had truancy problems and all kinds of problems with going to school and doing her work and stuff. So when she stayed with us, we kind of helped her out. And we got her on the right track, and she went back to live with her mother, and she graduated.
It seems to me like it would take a lot of energy. I have only one kid, and that seemed like a lot.
It does take a very lot of energy. But I think the toughest part of all of this is keeping schedules straight. For example, all the dentist appointments and doctor's appointments and sports schedules, because we have now 4 of them in sports. That is the most difficult thing for me, to try to keep everybody's stuff straight and remember everything. However, it kind of just flows.
The whole time I'm talking with Louisa and Nikki, their 20-year-old son Dominic is in the kitchen. Dominic and his 4 siblings were the first children that Nikki and Louisa adopted.
I was the oldest one, so I was kind of a parent since 9.
Well, yeah, since I walked in here, I've seen you in the kitchen preparing dinner.
Yeah, I take on a lot of responsibilities. Even over the years, I've really stepped up just to look after them and be there for them.
What do you remember about coming into this foster care situation?
It was very new to me. Sometimes I get flashbacks of like memories. When I look back at it, going to different houses was new and nerve-wracking because my siblings, one of them would act up, and I felt like that was always the reason we got moved, so I kept on trying so hard to keep everyone in check. I was in several foster care situations, I think 3 or 4. It always seemed short and seemed as if we were getting bounced around.
And eventually you met Nikki and Louisa, right?
Yes, December 18th, 2012 is the day.
You remember the day?
Yeah.
Why do you remember the day?
Well, every year, same with the adoption day, just holds a little bit more feeling over the years.
Do you celebrate Adoption Day?
Yeah, I do actually. Mostly, if I have something to do, I just make the most out of it and remember back on how I felt that day. I still remember the exact meal we had that day when we came to.
Tell me about that.
Baked spaghetti. Hated it.
Baked spaghetti?
Baked spaghetti.
And you hated it?
Yeah.
Why?
Never had it before.
Nobody would try it.
I wouldn't even try it, but like now I love it. Reflecting on this situation, but on the others, it's just so much better. Ever since like even the start, it just felt different. The other places, just seemed like things were limited. It seemed as if I couldn't trust the people that were watching us. And ever since coming here in 2012, it's been like an accepting factor. It's ever since felt like a collective unit. I didn't have to always try so hard.
I'm wondering what the last 12 years has felt like for you. Has it seemed like kind of like, you've really logged a lot of time here and it seems like a long time, or is it just blown by?
Feels like yesterday that I got adopted. It went by fast. It still feels like it. Even though I've known so much time has gone by, it just felt so fast.
What were the hard parts and what were the parts that make you smile?
The hard parts was probably just the beginning on how much I just always tried to keep my siblings in check. I guess starting off, I felt as if they behaved in a way, just like the other situations, we might get taken away. So the hardest parts was, I think, just me being in my own head, thinking I have to do all this and that. But the things that make me smile was definitely adoption day, because I knew I finally found a family, and another I could try and live out the rest of my childhood.
When you say that, I get this idea of you being kind of tense, like you're the one who was like kind of watching out for everybody, but that when you came here, maybe you could relax a little bit?
Yeah, after a while, I could relax a little bit. Starting off, even all the way until, not even all the way to adoption, really. It just felt so tense. I wasn't used to, having a dinner set. I was always tense on knowing what time everything was, like what time will dinner be, what time will we do this and that. And it was just new to me because I never had like a set schedule. I never knew when my next meal was or if I was ever going to have another one.
And so in a way, when you came here and you kind of set into a system.
Yeah, into a system. Always felt as if I was on my own, just scavenging the rest along and being the leader of everyone.
When he first got here, he was in a parent role with his siblings. He had a sister who was very difficult. She was a very difficult child. And she had RAD. And that's a reactive attachment disorder. And it's a part of a trauma. It comes from trauma. They moved a lot because foster parents could not manage that. It's very difficult, it really is. So he came very tense and very angry. He would get very angry because he was afraid that they would have to move again. And this went on for a while.
What was it like for you two? A, you've never done this before. B, you said maybe you wanted 2 or 3, you got 5. And C, you got one of them with a term I've just learned, which is RAD, which is, say it again?
Reactive attachment disorder.
So how did you get your arms around that?
I grew up in a children's home, and growing up in a children's home, I learned the tools that I needed to be able to deal with this kind of behavior because I have seen it before. and I had parents, they were not called foster parents, they're called house parents, but I saw how they dealt with people with behavior needs. So it wasn't easy, I'll tell you that. But I at least had some tools that I could use.
How long did it take you to get to the place where you thought and perhaps trusted that you were in a different situation with different parents who seemed to have your back and that you could kind of relax?
After so much of her misbehaving, we didn't go anywhere. And after a while, I kind of thought, well, maybe this is the real deal.
Larry Cooper of Florida's Children's Home Network says the issue is so multifaceted, it will take a lot more than just families stepping up to become foster parents. He says the truth is, many still hold outdated notions about who gets placed in foster care and whether or not they deserve help.
We haven't solved this problem for many years, which is the labeling of foster families. So identifying kids as foster children, we tend to marginalize their needs. We tend to categorize them as less than traditional children. But many kids in foster care are brilliant, creative, and don't get the same level of support. They have a very low graduation rate. They have a high unemployment rate. They have a high incarceration rate. They have a high homeless rate as they exit foster care. And so when I talk to legislators, and I even talk to them about kinship care families, they say, well, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, Larry. Why should we help these folks?
But what do you say to that? What do you say to those folks who would say that to you?
Well, I say that there are judges and lawyers and doctors who have the same problems in their families as anybody else, right? There's nobody that I know gets a pass on having a family member with mental illness or substance abuse or otherwise. We just don't hear about it because those people have the resources to help their family member or their family's child, and they don't come into the awareness of the foster care system. When you're impoverished and you don't have the resources, you get, looked at differently.
When you recreated that conversation, my thought was that politician doesn't seem very interested in breaking that cycle.
The challenge for the representatives that we run into is we got to introduce them to many families who are doing amazing work to raise and care for these children that are working poor. I've had grandparents who had to leave their careers and their jobs to come home to raise kids with physical disabilities, mental health problems. And so now their income is impacted by that. And now they're falling into a category where they'd never imagined they would be financially and needing the help. So I think part of the challenge is how do we introduce legislators to those families that are doing amazing for kids and breaking that stigma, those myths of, well, these are just people who are just sucking off of the system. I've gone to Tallahassee, I've gone to Washington, D.C. with caregivers and sat down in the offices of legislators, and they're amazed to hear what families are doing to support each other, the sacrifices that are being made, and the great results that it's translating into for kids. But they just need the financial support to make that happen.
What types of legislation should we look at to help ease the problems that need to be addressed with regard to foster care?
So there's been a lot of legislative action to try to decrease the accessibility of food stamps for vulnerable families. There's been a lot of legislative action to limit what families can access cash assistance for their family that's in a vulnerable moment. And certainly accessing them have a number of bureaucratic hurdles. So those are two direct things that could be preventing families from falling into that crisis stage that would lead them to end up in the foster care system. We learn as seniors get older, they have more and more food insecurity. But if they take on the care of a grandchild, they're 20% more likely to have food insecurity. So then they're going to be more likely to become in the awareness of child protective investigations, saying, oh, well, this kid's coming to school without food. And so now they get into the awareness of child welfare systems who may rush in and rush to judgment. And instead of providing them the resource, they rip a kid out of their home and disrupt the family for sometimes a lifetime, and then, don't provide them the resources that they need.
Cooper says this is where Kinship Navigator programs can be extremely helpful.
Kinship Navigator programs that we're seeing pop up around the country are specifically for those grand families, have helped families like, where's the food bank? How do we help you apply for these benefits? Like the cash assistance, just for one example, only 10% of grandparents that are eligible to get cash assistance for them raising a grandchild, only 10% are accessing those dollars. So that means 90% are not accessing the minimal financial assistance that they need to raise that child that came into their home due to a crisis. And so we have to first make them aware of it. We have to connect with them. And then we have to be really responsive with the support that we offer. Like, we have to be timely because, families are in crisis, and it doesn't take but 30 days to be in a real crisis when you take on 1 or 3 or 5 of your grandchildren, or you take in a foster child to feel upside down and sideways if you don't get the supports and resources that you need to be successful.
Nikki and Louisa Snuffer say the need is real in West Virginia.
Foster care is not something that's going to go away anytime soon, and it seems like as time progresses, more and more kids get taken into foster care. And it's not always substance abuse problems. It's not. It's poverty, it's mental health, you name it. And there's more than that who aren't officially in foster care, because we've seen it firsthand in the communities.
Her cousin actually took on 2 little girls from her church, and they just were adopted by her. And she's a single mom now with 2 little girls. Didn't ever want children, but kind of worked out for her that way.
Mm-hmm. They asked if she could help, and she said, of course, because, that's our family motto. And if people could step up and just be foster parents, they don't have to take on 8 kids at a time like us, even if it's just 1 or 2. It could make a real difference.
You've been listening to Us and Them. Our team for this episode was me, Trey Kay, Samantha Gatzik, and Kate Smith. Special thanks to Rachel Rosenberg and Emily Bakir from Child Trends, and Melinda Perez Porter of the Brookdale Foundation Group's Relatives as Parents program. Michael Lipton, Tristram Lozow, and Ahmad Solomon wrote and performed the Us and Them show music. Mark Lerner designed our logo. The marvelous people at PRX and West Virginia Public Broadcasting make Us and Them possible. So do grants from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, the West Virginia Humanities Council, the CRC Foundation, and the Daywood Foundation. Hey, we'd love to get your thoughts about this episode. Could you share them with us on our Facebook page or on X, formerly known as Twitter, at Us Them Podcast? Us and Them was originally developed with assistance from the mentorship program at AIR, the Association of Independents in Radio. We'll see you next time on Us and Them.
Support for this podcast comes from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.